Hello and welcome or welcome back to the Armchair Traveler Investigates. I'm Judy and I'm thrilled to have you join me for a historical deep dive, one of those how did she end up there explorations that I love so much. If you've traveled with me before, you probably realize that I tend to fall into rabbit holes. Well, one of them became today's topic. While researching the Plantagenets, a family bursting with brilliance, ambition, stubbornness, and no shortage of drama, I stumbled into the world of royal storytelling and myth-making. These people didn't just rule. They explained, they justified, and they marketed their positions. They still do. The Tudors picked up those stories and used them for their own purposes. That leads us directly to the star of today's episode, Shakespeare's Henry V. It's one of the most famous history plays ever written, but how much of it is history and how much of it is advertising? Today we're going to explore how kings, queens, and playwrights shape the stories we still believe about the past, why those stories may differ from reality, and why they still matter. So come with me, the Armchair Traveler, as we investigate the world of King Henry V. Let's start with a simple idea. History isn't just what happened. It's what someone decided to say happened. A case in point would be Julius Caesar. We remember him as a brilliant, fearless general, marching around Europe bringing civilization to the masses, but our visits all over France suggest something a bit different. A lot of his reputation comes straight from his own quill pen. He wrote detailed accounts of his campaigns, and let's just say he gave himself not just the benefit of the doubt, but a starring role. Modern archaeologists and historians have been peeling back the layers and discovering a story that's, well, a little less noble and a lot more political. It's been happening for almost 2,000 years now. Caesar was ambitious, he wanted fame, and he understood that if he could control the story, he would control how future generations would see him. And honestly, that's how it always works. Winners tell one version, their supporters reinforce it, and over time it becomes not just reporting, but history. So when Shakespeare sat down in the 1590s to write the story of King Henry V, he wasn't just entertaining an audience. Although that was part of it, the man had to make a living. He was working inside a long tradition of reshaping the past to support the present, especially a queen who needed strong, heroic English ancestors. Sometimes you actually do need to see the prequel before you see the main event. So let's roll back to the early 1400s, where Henry V stands tall, celebrated for his heroics at the Battle of Agincourt. He married Catherine of Valois, but tragedy struck and he passed away young. Catherine found herself in a complex situation. Their son, Henry VI, inherited the throne, but things did not go smoothly. Henry VI struggled with mental health illness, perhaps hereditary, and his reign was riddled with crises, one after another, creating a shaky foundation for the kingdom. After Henry V's death, Catherine secretly married Owen Tudor, a humble soldier and courtier, but a man with a charming spirit. Their union laid the groundwork for future kings, giving birth eventually to a new legacy, the Tudor line. Instability brewed under the reign of Henry VI, and the rival Yorkists emerged, led by the ambitious Richard, Duke of York. This set off the War of the Roses, an explosive conflict filled with bloodshed and power struggles between the Red Rose of Lancaster and the White Rose of York. Fast forward to 1485, the decisive battle at the field of Bosworth. Henry Tudor faced off against Richard III. When the dust settled, Henry emerged victorious, claiming the crown as Henry VII, a new hope for stability. To heal the rifts between the factions, Henry cleverly married Elizabeth of York, merging the two rival houses. Together, they introduced the iconic Tudor rose, symbolizing unity and peace at last. This line eventually led to Elizabeth I, daughter of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. Her reign from 1558 to 1603 became the Golden Age, filled with exploration, artistic achievement, and the establishment of Protestantism. But the story wasn't simple or neat. Elizabeth had many enemies and what could only be called a somewhat shaky claim to the throne. Let's jump backward to the 1500s, when Elizabeth I, the last Tudor monarch, sat on the English throne. She was brilliant, savvy, and politically sharp, but her family tree and her claim to the throne was, well, a bit wobbly. Her grandfather, King Henry VII, basically won the crown on the battlefield. Her own father, Henry VIII, turned the kingdom upside down by breaking with Rome, and her mother, Anne Boleyn, was executed under extremely messy circumstances, branding Elizabeth herself as a bastard and ineligible for the throne, and yet, here, decades later, she sat. So legitimacy was a real problem for Elizabeth. She needed stability, she needed loyalty, and she needed cultural works, things like plays, poems, pageants, portraits, and music that linked her to a proud, heroic English past, not to a somewhat less heroic line of potential grifters, crooks, and thieves. Enter Shakespeare. He gave England and Elizabeth not just entertainment, but reassurance. His history plays helped craft a sense of national identity at a time when Elizabeth desperately needed it. One of his most useful heroes turned out to be Henry V. His history plays weren't simply recounting events, they were shaping a memory. Think about Richard III. Shakespeare turned him into a twisted villain so successfully that people still picture him that way, despite some pretty questionable evidence. With Henry V, Shakespeare took a relatively small medieval victory and turned it into a national legend. He gave audiences a king who was brave, humble, brilliant, and divinely favored, basically a medieval superhero that England didn't even know it needed. And because his plays were so compelling, his version of these kings became the version most people remembered. Art doesn't just reflect history, sometimes it replaces it. In Shakespeare's hands, Henry became the perfect ruler. Handsome, inspiring, courageous, clever, and able to win impossible battles through sheer willpower and good speeches. This wasn't any accident. England in the 1590s was facing real international threats, especially from Spain, and morale inside the country was shaky. A play about a heroic English king defeating enormous odds, that was exactly the kind of national confidence booster that Elizabeth's England needed. When audience watched Henry rally his troops at Agincourt, they weren't just watching medieval history. They were experiencing a story that told them England is strong, England is chosen, England can face whatever comes next. It's myth-making at its finest. Jump ahead to 1944. Britain is exhausted, facing rationing that wouldn't end until the 1950s, bombed and fighting for its life. Into that world comes Laurence Olivier's film version of Henry V, and wow, did those people need it. Olivier gives us a bright, heroic, almost fairy tale England. His Henry is noble, confident, and supremely sure of his cause. Even the battle scenes feel uplifting. The whole film is designed to say, we've done the impossible before, and we can do it again. General Dwight David Eisenhower, who was in overall command of forces in the European theater, and his commanders even watched it while planning the D-Day landings. That's how powerful a morale booster this film was. It's not subtle, but it wasn't supposed to be. Olivier used Shakespeare to give wartime Britain exactly what Shakespeare once gave Elizabeth I. British audiences loved this film. They needed a hero, and Olivier delivered one in beautiful film form. His film became a symbol of national endurance during the darkest part of the war. America, though? Americans were a little cooler on it. It was a beautiful movie, yes, and stirring, but it wasn't their national story. Americans were fighting the same war, but their morale boosters needed different forms. Olivier's Henry V, even so, became one of the most admired pieces of wartime cinema, a reminder that sometimes storytelling is as essential to survival as strategy. 45 years later, Kenneth Branagh created the exact opposite kind of Henry V. His battlefield is more realistic: mud, smoke, fear, and exhaustion. Branagh's Henry wrestles with responsibility, guilt, and the real weight of leadership. He's still inspiring, but this time we see the cracks, the doubts, the faults, and the emotional cost of his crown. If Olivier gave us the legend, Branagh gives us a view of the human being inside that armor. This version fits its own time, too. The late 1980s were full of political complexity and moral ambiguity. People were more skeptical of tidy, heroic narratives. Brannig's Henry speaks to that world. So, which Henry is the real one? Well, in my opinion, both and neither. Olivier gives us the inspirational wartime hero, confident, polished, patriotic. He's the Henry that people wanted and needed back in 1944. Branagh gives us a much more nuanced and complicated leader, still brave, but troubled, self-questioning, and painfully aware of the human cost of his decisions. Shakespeare's original character contains each of these elements, and modern myth makers and movie makers can choose. The original is heroic and conflicted, victorious and uncertain, proud but still deeply aware of the weight of his kingship. So each filmmaker spotlights a different side of him. Olivia shows us the legend, Branagh shows us the man. Each version tells the same basic story, but from quite different points of view, and each is worth your effort to go see. Thank you for joining me for this episode of The Armchair Traveler Investigates. If you enjoy my work, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. That'll help my channel grow. Meanwhile, come back next time for another adventure with me, The Armchair Traveler, as your guide.